Welcome back to the Speaking and Communicating podcast. I am your host, Roberta Ndlela. If you are looking to improve your communication skills, both professionally and personally, this is the podcast you should be tuning into. Communication and soft skills are crucial for your career growth and leadership development. And by the end of this episode, please log on to Apple and Spotify and leave us a rating and a review. Now let's get communicating with my friend Latifa Arab, who is a leadership coach and specializing in intercultural global differences. She helps leaders with especially diverse workspaces where everybody can be thriving and navigating these cultural differences in the workplace and find commonalities that will help us all win at the end. And before I go any further, please help me welcome her to the show. Hey, Latifa.
Hi, Roberta.
How
Thank
are
you very
you?
much for having me today. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's my pleasure. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited that you're here. Please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, I think you've done already a good job, but yes, I'm a leadership coach and intercultural expert. And so I help leaders and organizations to succeed in navigating across cultures. And I use the approach of cultural intelligence. I mean, it's all the research around that I use to help leaders and organizations. Yeah.
Mm. Of all the things you could have chosen as a career, why did you focus on culture?
That's a good question. I think simply because I love culture since I'm a kid. So it really goes back to my childhood. I was born in France and I grew up in France from two Moroccan parents. So from a very young age, I grew up with dual culture, right? So I at home it was the Moroccan and it's still the Moroccan culture, but outside it's the French culture. And I have always thought it's really funny because really when I was younger, I always thought, oh my God, it's interesting that I am experiencing these two cultures at once, at the same time simultaneously, and it really gave me this ability that to perceive the world from different lenses. So from a very young age, I've always understood that there is not just one way to read the world and to read how people behave, how people think, because in Morocco, people think, behave, act a certain way, and in France, it's the same thing. And so I've always been fascinated with cultures and very much opened to other cultures. Yeah.
That's a very beautiful way of putting it, that you see the world in a different way. But here's the thing. So if you're in a Moroccan household, but you live in France and you can tell those differences, was it challenging? Did you ever think, if I was a French kid in a French household and I can go into French society, my life would be so much easier?
There are, what was for me, there were a couple of things that were difficult. The first one is the contradictions between the two cultures, right? So let's take the example of France and how France is organized as a society and politically. So in France, it's a presidency. You elect a president, and then you have a government that govern the country. It's a secular country, which means that this religion is separate from the state, right? But if you look at Morocco, Morocco is it's not a presidency; it's a monarchy. There is a king, a monarch, right, who is now Mohammed the Sixth. I
Mm-hmm.
was going to say it in Arabic, but it's Mohammed the Sixth, and the monarch is responsible for the country, for the people, but he's also a guarantor of the religion. And so, the religion in Morocco is Islam.
Right.
And in fact, the sort of the uh, it's a sort of like in France, you've got égalité, liberté, égalité, fraternité, which is like freedom, sort of brotherhood, fraternity, which means like solidarity between people, in equality. The equivalent in Morocco is God, the people, and the monarch and the king, right? So you can see that in the French culture and in the Moroccan culture, it's totally different. And so it took me some time to kind of reconcile the two, and to understand that you can actually make the two cohabit within yourself, if that makes sense. Yeah. So what was your question? Sorry, I feel like I'm diverting a little bit.
Exactly what you just explained, which is, okay, if I'm here, because I'm guessing your parents conducted themselves in a Moroccan way in the household, but then you go out into French society.
Right. Yes.
Navigating those differences, was it challenging for you?
And I think that the second, it wasn't challenging as, I mean, I think that when you are a kid, you absorb everything. So I don't think I've seen, it wasn't like a challenge because I was going to a French school. So I was learning the French educational way of, learning. So it's not something that was difficult, because it's not like I was born in Morocco and then at 10 years old or 15 years old I came to France and
Yeah.
then I'm confronted to a completely new way of education. Even the program in the curriculum is different. It wasn't that type of difficulties, but one of them was more around facing racism, which means that you are in that society and you at some point where you sort of can understand things, then you understand that you are different, and you are sometimes reminded that your difference is not a good difference, right? And that's when like I understood racism from a very young age as well. So I think this is the part that was a bit challenging for me, because obviously I was born in France, I grew up in France. I didn't feel that I was a stranger, but it's like what the society mirrors to you as, oh, not sure you belong to France. So I think that was the part that was difficult. But the part about understanding how to learn, how to read, playing outside with other kids. All kids do that, so it's not really a matter of whether it was something cultural or not.
That's so fascinating the way you explain that. I remember when we used to teach English in South Korea, I would always emphasize to my students that English is not better than Korean. Let's understand that.
Mm.
It's a different language that if you want to venture outside of South Korea, especially when you get older, the rest of the world, you want to, you know, tap into more opportunities in English speaking countries. It does not mean that it's a better language than yours. We did not come here to make you think that Korean is less than. Get that
Exactly.
straight. Yes.
You're
And
completely right. Mm.
exactly. So that's when you say that it made you feel that your culture is less than, because I think that's one thing people, when it comes to racism, that they misinterpret, which is just because it's different, it doesn't mean that it's less than.
Absolutely. I always say that all cultures are different, but they're all equally different.
Mm, exactly. So now let's talk about when you finished school and you decided, was this the first career path you chosen, or did you first take a detour?
I took a detour. So I coming back to what you've just said, when I was at school, and as I said to you, I understood from a very young age that you can see the world through as many cultural lenses as that exist really. And so I wanted, and because I was also facing racism, I also thought, you know what, I don't want to be in a place where I will not feel that I belong. And so I decided to study languages. So at that time, I thought, okay, which language should I study? And a little bit like you with the Korean students, you are teaching them English because it's the international language. So I studied English, I studied Spanish, and I studied a little bit also of Arabic. And from there, I thought initially I wanted to work in marketing, in a global organization, international organizations in marketing, and I wanted to do something in, cosmetics or fashion, something like that, which
All the
not
beautiful
I
stuff.
didn't do at all.
Yeah.
But I ended up working in finance, in asset management, and but even if I was working, like when I started working in finance, I worked on, I was working on the international market. So I've never worked for the French market, even at that time. So I joined, that the financial company that I worked for at that time, and I was focusing on Europe, the European markets and the Asian markets. But it was straight after my studies, so I didn't even work for the French market. The time I started to work for the French market was when I came to the UK, and I worked for an American company here, and they were looking for people who were French speakers. And that's when I started to work for the French markets with the French team in the UK. So I've never really worked for the French market when I was in France. And I think that really summarizes my career. I've always sought an international exposure. I've never really, because to be honest, it's simply because this is where I feel the most comfortable.
Mm. It's funny because just what I said earlier, knowing how to speak French opened up the opportunity because they said we're looking for French speakers.
That's right. Yes.
So the
Yes,
beauty
absolutely.
of being open to other cultures, other languages is actually beneficial to you.
Completely, 100%. Yes, absolutely. And in fact, when I was working in France, I was working for the Spanish market because I spoke Spanish.
There
Mm.
you go. See?
Yeah,
It keeps
exactly. Yeah, I
it
agree.
keeps opening up doors. I love it. Now, how did you then make the switch from finance to I'm going to help leaders with intercultural expertise?
That was a jump.
Mhm.
So the truth is, as I said to you initially, I wanted to do something in cosmetics or in fashion, whatever. And I ended up in finance, but it wasn't my first choice because I didn't really study finance. But and then you get into the industry and you're pushed to learn. And to be fair, I've learned a lot. I really, you learn a lot of skills in the industry, in the companies for which I worked. But it's never been something that I was passionate about. It's never been something that really made me wake me up in the morning feeling energized, excited about my day. You know, it felt really like, yeah, it's great, pays well,
Pays the bills.
it pays the bills. It's intellectually stimulating because markets change all the time with economics, with what's going on in the economy and in politics. But other than that, it wasn't really my passion. And at some point, I was a consultant in asset management. I was working as a consultant. And then one day I was called for an interview to work for a consultancy firm. And I started to take the interviews, and I just thought, that's it. I don't want to go back to the corporate world. I don't want to work in like that consultancy firm. I was going to join the finance department,
Mm.
and I just thought, that's it. I don't want to be a business manager there. I don't. And I remember just thinking, calling the HR. Sorry, calling the HR lady who was coordinating the interviews, and they had called me for the third interview. And I said, and I called her back and I said, look, I really appreciate it, but the truth is that I think I don't want to do this anymore. And I was really very transparent. And she asked me, what do you want to do? I said, I have no idea. But the one thing I know is that I don't want to continue doing that. And you know, when you are a kid and where you are young, you follow your intuition, you follow your heart, you know. And so it took me some time before, you know, and then after 17 years in asset management, it took me some time before figuring out what do I want to do next. Because it's one thing when you go through the elimination process, as I say, which is you want to eliminate the things that you know you don't want to continue to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's another thing to discover, but what is it that you want to do? You
That's
know?
right.
And I didn't have the answer at the time. So I just tried a few things. I did small jobs, not that I like, not I want to diminish like other jobs, but I did jobs that I just thought I just want to test and see what resonates with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I came to the conclusion that I've always liked cultures. I've always liked languages. I've always liked being exposed to and speaking and living in international places. And so I thought, you know what, this is exactly what I want to do. And in fact, this idea of founding, creating Compatible, which is the name of, you know, my company and the brand as well, it was something I had in mind when I was 27, and I found it in one of my notepads, notebooks, and I remember all the ideas that I wrote down, and I was just like, "This is it. This is what I like, and this is what I want to do."
That is so powerful, manifesting. That's very
Yeah,
powerful
yeah. Took
because
a long time to manifest, but it's at the end.
it's never too late. It never is too late because more than anything, like you said, you followed your gut, you followed your intuition. Because the thing about it is, I'm also wondering when you were still working in finance, were there any triggers that you recognized and you thought, oh, this is a cultural difference moment? Or the reason there's a misunderstanding here is the culture. Were there any moments like that while you were still working in finance?
Yes, yes. And I think about a couple of ones.
Mm,
There is one. I was also working with the Middle East at the time, and and one thing that the French people, and I was working for the Middle East, and I was also working on what are called Sharia compliant funds. So we were like putting together, because not going to say, I don't want to name the name of the company, but that company was also based, had an office in Saudi Arabia.
okay.
And so we were putting together, creating that product for that market, because the people in Saudi Arabia only invest in Sharia compliant funds. And I could easily see how people didn't understand that when you work with Middle Eastern people, there are things like building a relationship and trust, which is important. So, as far as I am concerned, when I was talking and speaking with my counterparts in the Middle East, I would spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes, we would be talking about, well, what's going on in your life, how is your family, how are things, and then we would get to the conversation, okay, so how can I help you? And because we built that sort of a trust between us, then they would tend to come to me if there was an issue, and then use me as the sort of the person who's going to coordinate with the people in France. And I think it's like, for anyone listening, it's very important that you create that bond, that creates that relationship with the Middle Eastern people, but also that you don't break the trust. Once the
Mm-hmm.
trust is there, try not to break it. Make sure you don't break it. And
Mm-hmm.
the second one was, and it's actually a little bit in alignment um, well, actually, the second one was, so the people from the Middle East came to the French office, and for lunch they had ordered some sandwich, and some of the sandwiches had pork, which wasn't, of course, not really, because again, so most of the countries in the Middle East are Muslim, and so they don't eat pork. It's as simple as that. So that was a sort of cultural faux pas, but it's not a big mistake, to be honest. Like it's just it's just that you wish that we can flex. Like the French people, you can eat beef, you can eat chicken, you can eat other meat sort of things. So it's good to kind of find this, being able to be flexible and find that, okay, we can't bring pork, but we can offer other alternatives. And the
That
second one
sounds
was,
like, sorry, Latifa, to interrupt you. That sounds like the airplane model where they say, do you have any allergies? Because they're going to cater to you. You're going to be the guest on the aeroplane. So if
yes,
you have people from a different culture, are you suggesting that we also, if they're coming to our domain, we also ask those types of questions?
yes, because imagine you have someone from, imagine you're working with Indians, and they're Hindu, right?
Mm.
You can't come and offer them beef for lunch. I mean, for those who, for those who obviously, like the Hindus that, what do you say, like for whom the cow is sacred,
Cow is sacred in India, yes.
right?
Mm.
So it's just like some, just for me, it's logical, but it's just small things that you can think about ahead of time, and that you can adapt when they come. And to be honest, imagine they are clients, right? It's if you want to win business, you probably doing that small gesture is probably going to take you a long way, because then it shows to you are showing to this to the pros to your potential clients that you understand them, that you are putting efforts to understand them, that you are putting efforts in this business relationship. So yeah, for me it's obvious, but you know and similarly, in India, you have also a lot of people who don't eat meat at all, who are just vegetarian,
Sure. Mm.
right? So I just think that wherever you can be flexible and doesn't cost you. For me, it doesn't cost me not to eat beef. It's fine. It doesn't really cost me anything. I can eat something else. So if it doesn't cost you anything, and you can find that middle point, get into that middle ground where it's the sweet spot for the two of you, why don't you do it? I mean,
Mm.
I don't see any um, contradictions there. Yeah.
Not only that, like you said, it creates trust, which you mentioned earlier. And when I know that somebody took the time to care
Yeah.
about my culture, I'm
Yeah.
not just a client and you see dollar signs when you see my face. That goes a long way, like you said. That builds the relationship you spoke of earlier.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Mm.
And now let's talk about, so those are the cultural moments you experienced. There's a six dimensions model by Geert Hofstede, which we'll just mention the one, which is individualism versus collectivism, which basically means you either come from a culture where everybody's individualistic or come from a culture where everybody thinks collectively. Did you notice some of those differences when you used to work in finance?
Yes. Alors, I just want to be a little bit. So when we say individualistic, it doesn't mean, and it's very important, it doesn't mean selfish.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it doesn't mean egoistic. It doesn't mean it's all about me, and my own interests. It doesn't mean that. It's just a way to frame it, but it doesn't. I just want to make sure, like, you shouldn't be associated with being selfish, because it's not true.
And we're
Uh,
not making people feel bad about coming from
exactly,
those
and you
cultures.
don't
It's
want
not
to make
about that.
people feel
No.
bad. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Thank
So,
you.
like in individualistic cultures, they prioritize personal autonomy and independence um, over the group loyalty. So the key attributes for that are going to be things like personal achievement and personal performance are valued over the group success. Like it's important for you to perform as an individual in the group. Um, um, people in individualistic cultures are expected to take care of themselves. And for example, in France, when you are 18 years old, you are encouraged to, become your own adult and thrive as an adult and, leave home and live your life, because there is an emphasis on freedom and self-expression. And the decision making also is based on individual preferences and a lot more on logic. So let's talk about a few examples of countries that are individualistic. You've got a lot of them are Western
Right.
countries and cultures. So the United States of America, United Kingdom, Australia. These countries are in what we call individualistic countries. Now, if we look at collectivism, as you mentioned earlier, the collectivist cultures, they emphasize the harmony of the group over the individual interest. So things like the success is a group success. It's not an individual. It's not. It's you work in order to ensure that the group succeeds, not you as a person is going to succeed alone. Like, it's not about your personal ambitions, basically. There is also a strong emphasis on family and community. So in some of the collectivist cultures, you will find, for example, in the family, you will find that in the same households, the parents live there, the kids live there, the grandparents also live there, right? Or you will find your own kids and your grandkids living with you, right? I mean, it's a bit the same thing, just like repeating now here. But so it's all about prioritizing. Thank you.
My
The
pleasure.
group over the individual. And decisions are, most of the time, they are made on a consensus basis, but with the objective of keeping the group in mind. What is best for the group, not just what's best for me. And so examples again of collectivist cultures, you've got China, you've got Japan, you've got
South
Mexico.
Korea. I remember when I went to teach there, and they talk a lot about the Korean War. Then there was the ceasefire in 53, and then they started to build from scratch because everything was destroyed. And I remember, so the female president, President Park Geun-hye, former female president, her dad was the president back in those times. And I know today they throw words around like dictator and whatnot. But the thing is, he got them to build again after the war. And you would work, and there'd be certain days when you work to contribute to the government fund to build the country. It's not your money. It's let's build Korea now from scratch because we have nothing. The rice needs to grow, everything. And so that culture was necessary at the time. It had to exist in order for it to be what it is today. I mean, today, obviously, and it can change because now I think most Korean people just live their lives like the way you explained, 18 and then you move out. Some do stay home until they get married, especially the ladies, but just in general, it was necessary at the time to have the collectivism culture for everybody's survival
Yes.
and to build Korea to be the country. I remember somebody explained it to me this way. So in the United Nations, you have a column, two columns, one for countries that need aid, one for countries that give aid. So at one moment, South Korea was in the column where countries that need aid, they needed help. Now they jumped over to the column where they give help because that's how well they're doing. So it can change, and I think depending on the circumstances, maybe it's okay for governments and for societies to rethink and think, are we still doing okay? Do we need to shift some things right now and maybe go back to doing whatever we want?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, actually. I don't know exactly, look, I'm not super knowledgeable about the story of South Korea, but when you mentioned the American aid, and you mentioned that now they have probably transitioned in more an individualistic um, culture. One, you can compare that with North Korea, that is not like South Korea by far.
Yeah, they're a little different.
But I wonder if that's, sometimes I wonder if how much of United States of America influenced South Korea in their, you know, in their
Transition to a more different
transition,
culture.
and if
Yeah.
the aid was not also probably a little bit conditioned because you know, because remember there was also at the time the whole Cold War between communism and the model from the democracies in especially in the United States of America, as we're talking about America here.
Mm.
And yeah, so that's interesting actually.
Yes. And speaking of that as well, when you mentioned that some cultures, you live with a grandma, and it makes me question the generational wealth, the benefits of it. Do you create more generational wealth when you are in a collectivism culture? Because let me give an example. So the Indian population back in South Africa, they have these humongous triple-story mansions.
Oh wow.
Because what happens is not only do you live with the grandparents, but if you have, say, three siblings, one gets married, they come home with their spouse and they live here in one wing of the house. And then the other sibling gets married and they do the same thing. So you have about four families in the same house. That's why it's huge. It's a mansion that is so big to accommodate all these different families. So do you build more generational wealth that way instead of everybody, you're 18, go out and find your own studio apartment and find a job at McDonald's? Do you think that is how sometimes generational wealth is created?
When you say generational wealth, what?
Because I think once you have all your siblings here in this big house, I I don't know. I'm asking if anybody has any information, but I don't know if everybody lives here instead of renting their own apartments or having their own, which because that means all the expenses and everything is in different homes instead of being under one roof. Do you think they save more money for the next generation? They create trust funds. Because it's obviously less expensive to share than it
Absolutely,
is to individualistically live.
that's true. Yes, that's true. It's an interesting question.
Because I've seen that phenomenon quite a lot at home. And what happens is then the next generation, do they take over the mansion and create the next you know what I mean? It's an interesting, I don't have the answer, but it's just a thought. Now let's talk about the model. What model do you use with your clients when helping them with their cultural challenges, especially in the workplace?
Yes. So the model that I use, I mean, the framework that I use is that I go from what I call like we look at the macro factors, which are the external factors of culture. Things like simple things like what type of political um, country is that? You know, is it socialist? Is it communist? Is it a democracy? Or is what type of how do you say political um,
What the
structure
yeah, what the political landscape
governs,
is.
yeah,
Yeah.
that
Mm.
that govern that country. So we look at that. We look I look you look at what is the religion of that country, the educational system, the history, very important, the history, because you know when you just spoke about Indian living all together in order to create and to increase their wealth. The first, I don't have the answer, but the first question that I was wondering is that I was thinking, is it linked to the fact that in the past their parents, grandparents, or great grandparents suffered from poverty, and so by default now they are in a moment where they feel that they want to save money in order to build their wealth, Or is it in relation simply to a collectivist value that is important for the Indian, which is regardless of how much money you earn, or regardless of your wealth, we still live all together as a family. That's for
The
example.
history behind the decisions they make. Yes, that's
Exactly,
a very good
exactly.
point. Yeah.
So we'll this is the first thing that we sort of want to look at, and then the second thing is all around intercultural competencies. So I spoke a little bit about that, which is like things like trust. How do you build trust in that culture, in a particular culture? How do you make decision? How do people perceive time? Um, how do is it a hierarchical or an egalitarian type we say power distance, so things like that are in relation to building your intercultural competencies, and then from there we put together a strategy that will apply for your circumstances. And then from that strategy, it's very important that we also work on what you are ready to be flexible on. Because what you don't want when you're working as an individual and as a professional is that you don't want to feel that you have compromised so much that you don't feel you're authentically yourself.
Right.
And so the idea is, I'm happy to be a leader, but I want also I'm happy to be a leader. I'm happy to be flexible, but I don't want to lose my own authenticity. And so it's all this idea of what is it that you feel comfortable with in your behavior, in your way of interacting with other people, that you can be flexible on. And so from there then you take action, and from actions you get feedback, and then from feedback you keep improving and practicing. And in fact, for me, being culturally intelligent is really a skill, like a muscle that you want to build. You don't build a muscle in theory. In theory
If
how to build
only.
yeah, I need to go to the gym. I need to exercise 3 times a week. I need to do strength training. I need to have the appropriate amount of protein to build the muscle. So you know it, the knowledge part of it. That's the theory. But the truth is that for as long as you don't go to the gym, you never build that muscle. But cultural intelligence is the same thing. So you need to understand the theory, and then you need to apply it. And the more you're going to go to the gym and follow the right steps, the bigger your muscle. And it's the same thing for cultural intelligence. The more you will practice it, the better you will get at it, and the more also comfortable and confident you become along the way.
Being curious about other cultures. Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the first step. Yes.
Hmm. Well, okay, so those are the leaders. What would you say to someone who comes from a different culture? Let's say you come from the Far East and you enter the American workspace, because the global workplace is so very diverse now. You enter the workspace of an American company. I found that when I was there, usually because respect is like the number one value, usually out of respect, Korean people don't speak unless spoken to, unless asked. Whereas if you're in the United States, people just speak up.
Mm.
So if you're in a Zoom call and you're a Korean colleague with Americans and they're just speaking and nobody calls on you, you run the risk of not sharing your ideas, not raising whatever question you might have had, because nobody actually took the time to say, Latifa, do you have anything to say?
Mm.
How would you then insert yourself and adapt to being now more outspoken, coming from a culture where, out of respect, you don't speak unless called on?
Yeah. So it comes back to the framework that I've just described. It's not because you're coming from the Far East that it's a different framework. It's exactly the same thing. So it's your responsibility as a professional to try to understand what is this culture and this country that I will work in. and what is it that I need to understand about the American way of working? How can I adapt? You know, how can I learn all the skills that I need to learn in order to be able to speak up in a meeting, and understand that it's not because you understand that it's not because you're spoken at, that you're not asked to speak, that it means that you were trying to exclude you. It's just that the culture that you are navigating in is in favor of you speaking up for yourself, because you're an individualistic culture. And so it's for you to understand that, first of all, so that you don't get offended by it, number one. And that, and then you can think about, okay, so what do I need to do? What do I need to change in order for me to integrate and be able to speak up? But the question can be also a larger question, a broader question, in the sense that if the company or the company knows that they have people from different cultures, they have a little bit of responsibility as well, to be able to recognize that there are differences in the way people operate in the professional space. And so they can bring cultural experts to explain them, okay, well, if you have Korean and Chinese and Japanese in your team, you may want to, ask them if they have something to add, or, in a meeting, to give them the sort of, I was going to say, the right to speak. So it goes both ways. It really goes both ways. So it's an understanding on both sides, really.
So we must all take the initiative. Yes. Any
Mm-hmm.
last words of wisdom on being culturally intelligent?
Yes. When I started this, it wasn't just about, coaching, training people to be culturally intelligent in at work, in the workplace. For me, it goes beyond that, because for me, it really is about bridging gaps between cultures. It's really creating those bridges between people, and so that people can understand each other, but also so that people can be open and curious and learn from the beauty and the richness and the attributes that other cultures have, that can be also beneficial for you, and and be able to it may sound cliche, but to live in harmony together. It's really about that. And so, of course, I do it in the for organizations and as a work, as a job. But ultimately, I just want people to be able to live together, and value their differences, and not point them as a problem.
Let's value our differences and connect to the humanity within us. Words of wisdom from Latifa Aarab, the leadership coach specializing in being globally, culturally intelligent. As an expert in the field, she helps leaders with especially diverse workplaces. Thank you so much for being here today. I learned so much from you, and I'm sure the listeners will as well.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Thank you again for having me today.
My absolute pleasure. Would you like our listeners to reach out to you, and where?
Yes, so for anyone who would like to reach out to me, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. So my name is Latifa Aarab. You'll find me as Latifa Aarab, but you can also send me an email at info@compatibleofficial.com, all in one word.
Latifa Aarab, who is on info@compatible.com. Thank you very
Compatible
much.
Official.
Compatible official, thank you, .com. I'll put that in the show notes just in case I
Sure.
butchered
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify, and stay tuned for more episodes to come.